Welcome everyone back. I'm Mark Sussman from Concordia University in Montreal, and I'm very excited to be here to celebrate not only John and his multiple fields of experience and expertise, and but also to celebrate the launch of this new book, Making Meaning in Puppetry, Materials, Practice, Perception. And we have two of the three co-editors and one contributor today on stage. Co-editors Dassia Posner from Northwestern University and Claudia Orenstein from Hunter College. They've both been introduced today, so I'll leave the intros short. We also need to acknowledge co-editor Alyssa Mello, who's not with us today. Alyssa Mello is an editor, scholar, theater artist, and Marie Sklodowska-Curie Individual Fellow at the University of Exeter in the UK. Their interests include women and performance, gender, identity, and practice. And their current research project is a trans-historical study of women practitioners and performance of gender in Punch and Judy. So Alyssa Mello has sent a little message, which we'll get to later, but isn't with us in person. And all the way on the left, contributor to the book, Felice Amato, is assistant professor of art education at Boston University, working at the intersection of visual arts, pedagogy, and performance. And I think, as Matthew mentioned, Amato's forthcoming book is Women, Performance, Masks, and the Body, exploring themes of gender and embodiment in material performance. So it's a very great group. I wanted to start maybe with just a few thoughts from what's been accumulating today. Taking inspiration in many ways from John's career as a scholar, an artist, and a curator together, and our being here at the Ballard Institute, both of which inspire us how to think about how these practices inform each other. And that had me thinking about the way an anthology is also a curated collection. Which does a kind of performing, a kind of textual performing of juxtaposition and overarching narrative through its organization, through its structure. So that's something I'd like my colleagues here to comment on. I guess in terms of what's been spoken about so much today already about curating and the museum context for puppets and objects, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about how performance, maybe a few decades back, really started to be discovered by like the official realms of art history and museum curation. I think of the Marina Abramovich exhibit, not just exhibit, but installation, retrospective at the MoMA, Rikrit Tiruvanaja's exhibit and performance work at the Guggenheim, which sort of launched a kind of taking up of contemporary performance art by art museums. Now it's completely common to have curatorial positions for performance in large museums, certainly in the big sort of blockbuster museums, performance spaces being incorporated into museum design. So it's really something that's accelerated in the past 20, 30 years. And it always seems to me that theater and the material histories of theater get a little bit left out, or they can be sometimes referenced metaphorically, but very often by folks who are not necessarily theater practitioners, not necessarily puppetry practitioners, but there's certainly a tradition. And a great exception to that was a book that John contributed to, and you have to remind me, Ingrid Schaffner's collection, exhibition catalog, The Puppet Show, right? Yes. Is what it's called, from Philadelphia, was a really great sort of counter example to that sort of forgetting or exclusion that I'm talking about a little bit. So I think it's great that we're here thinking, and with Masha in Munich and others thinking about the performativity of puppets in the exhibition context. So just a little bit of a jump from, the anthology as a kind of collection as well. I also just want to commend the book to everyone on Zoom and here, for among other reasons, the way it gets out of a tradition or a trap of acknowledging a certain absence of let's see, a kind of institutionally common focus on text or actor-based theater or text-based dramaturgy, which puppet scholarship has sort of had to position itself against, to say, well, we're not this or we're not that. And I feel like this book kind of does away with that need. It sort of dives into puppets in a very direct and joyful way, taking puppetry as the starting point, not as a form that needs justification or apology or comparison to other forms of theater. So that's something I want to applaud here. And then finally, I hope this isn't too much to pile on. I really appreciate that this collection foregrounds what anthropologists used to call thick description, or rich description of puppets, materials. And I'm thinking of Claudia's earlier presentation and Paulette's earlier presentation from this morning, that are both take us from detailed descriptions of materials to social histories, from sort of material history to social history, and the way puppets lead us there. So there's also a kind of a beautiful sort of disciplinary, not just juxtaposition, but overlaying of multiple disciplines as we go through puppet scholarship. So those are just a few things to throw out. But I thought I would begin by asking the co-editors and Felice as a contributor to maybe address the conceptual framing of the book, how it came together, and maybe a word about each section, materials, practice, and perception, as the sections of the book. Maybe talk about how those were framed.
You want to start, or no? Well, maybe I'll start with where the book came from, which is out of, so it's interesting, we've been talking about, Matthew was talking about sort of developing the field, which has been this ongoing project that John has been so involved with and so important in. And we had started a working group. There's the American Society for Theater Research has these working group sessions, and we had started one for puppetry as a way of giving another venue and another way of supporting people who are scholars and wanted to write about puppetry, and wanted conversations about that and wanted to improve their writing. And so out of these sessions that were going on at this conference over several years, one of the things that became clear, I guess, is the need for a kind of common vocabulary, a common way of describing and talking about puppetry. And as you've said, Mark, like not just appealing to it's not this or it's not that, or just falling back on text or falling back on theatrical models, but sort of saying like, how is it that we talk about it? So I would say that was the first genesis of this, trying to really encourage the people in that group to start writing in that way, to develop communally a vocabulary, a set of references, and out of that work, we came to this idea, or in conjunction with that, the idea of a publication that people would be writing towards that would do this work and provide models for that, so that, people who are approaching writing about puppetry have really strong models. Not that there aren't others, but often we found even people who are writing about puppetry in this group didn't describe the puppets. We'd be like, well, you need to say more, because that's where everything is happening. It's happening in the materiality. Can you show us what kind? Can you tell us what kind? And so we were really stressing that. Start there.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is how much I see this as a sort of a volume 2 of the Routledge Companion to Puppetry and Material Performance. Both volumes, even though, you know, like that one was 2014, and grew out of the conference that Claudia and John and myself and Bart and others organized here. The thing that was really striking about that conference is the sense of relief and joy that participants felt. Some of you, you know, were there and you remember. But this idea that, oh, other people around the world are having the same kinds of conversations. I don't have to constantly be reinventing. We can start building a joint conversation, right? So that was the thing that was really exciting about that. With this volume, I think what we're trying to do much more actively and much more intentionally is to shape the conversation. What we've seen over many years now of this ASTR working session is really exciting scholarship, pronounced growth in the field, people who didn't consider themselves interested in puppets wanting to join the session so that they can learn more and they can develop a vocabulary. So it's kind of partly for those folks. We wanted to make sure that there was a vocabulary and a continued growth. But then also we noticed that at times some of the papers felt like, okay, well, in order to justify this thing that I'm talking about with the puppets, I need to, you know, draw in literary theater. I need to draw in object-oriented ontology. I need to draw in sociology. I need to draw in these other things. And by no means do we want the field to become less interdisciplinary, but we don't want that to always have to be the starting point. So the point of this book is, okay, what do puppets already do? What is the, you know, to use John's words again, that Colette referred to in the last session, the performance triad. There's the material, the object, there's the performer, and there's the audience. And then that gives, that's why we've structured the book that the way we've structured it is we're thinking about what are the fundamental elements. How do you think about materials? How do you think about the interaction between the puppet and the puppeteer and how things are created? And then how do you think about how the audience makes meaning from that?
And I want to add one really important aspect of the structure, which is that, as you've noticed, the foreword is by John Bell. And the afterword is by Will Bixby, who's one of Dassia's students. And we were really happy when John agreed to write this foreword for us, because we feel that so much comes out of everything that he's done, and that this is the field sort of developing from his work. And we see Will as being sort of the next generation.
Yeah.
So the book is also asking this question: where have we come from? How do we, you know, develop where we are? And how are we passing something on?
And Will's afterword, when you read it, you'll see that it deals with his discovery and love now of toy theater. And the work will continue because Will is writing one of his dissertation chapters on great small works. Yeah.
So maybe we could stick for a minute with foregrounding description, because my question that I emailed a couple of days ago had to do with how this is something I think about and struggle with, how description carries theory, or how, you know, when you're writing description of any kind of performance, doesn't have to be puppetry performance, you're already theorizing it, and you're already making choices about what details to include, what not to include, whether to focus on paint chips that come off in your hand, thinking of Kathy Shaw's description of handling, I can't remember what puppet it was.
The Vietnamese water puppet.
The Vietnamese water puppet, thank you. And Felice, in your description of like the sewn joints of the Valerie Solanas puppet in one incarnation versus the fabric over joints versus those that were left visible, you know, right away, the inclusion, exclusion of those details tells us something about your reading of the play and of the material. Maybe, I don't know if you'd like to talk about
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, I want
as
to
a
say,
writer in the book.
yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Dassia and Lisa and Claudia, because they were so generous, and the feedback that they gave over the period that we're working on this really, my writing grew. I think I started in the beginning not even really knowing who my audience was, and they were really helpful in clarifying that we are writing for, people who in most cases will not have seen the show, and sadly with Chambre Noire maybe never will, because we I don't know if it will ever be remounted and tour again. And so that kind of really helped, because it really brought me to this mission of having to really describe in detail what I saw. I really appreciated your prompt also, because I think when you were talking about how does close description carry and afford theory, it felt like yes, and now this is language I can use to kind of clarify even what it is that I think what I think I can bring to the writing, and what I enjoy about writing, and what I want to do in the future, without maybe as Dassia had alluded to, sometimes kind of a lot of like forward kind of leading theory, and then feeling like, okay, I've got to get that theory out there. No, there's value in these thick descriptions. And I've been really trying to stress to my students, AI is there, they're going to use it, whatever, but writing is thinking. And when they give up that opportunity to like craft, and it is time consuming and it is iterative, but when they give up the opportunity to really craft something, they're giving up the opportunity to think in a lot of ways. And I'm just gonna give like one example of something that I would not have, if I hadn't been writing about it, I wouldn't have even realized that I had seen it and felt it the way that you feel things from puppets, like something, but it's just known. Because when I was writing, I was thinking about the first opening of the scene where Valerie Solanas, the kind of dying Valerie Solanas is, and I say in the book, I originally said propped against the bed, but she's not propped against the bed. One arm is extended, her chin is on the bed, and she's got just enough lift that you understand that she's not dead. But I had to write about that to understand, to know that I knew that innately as the opening scene. And it's so significant, right? Because this is all these last few moments as she's dying. So yeah, so thank you for that question.
I want to say that I started writing about puppetry to begin with because I was seeing such interesting things and looking at things and saying, how is all of this expressing something? And when I started, and I think this is a lot of people start writing about puppetry have this experience too, which is it becomes so complicated because you have to start thinking about like, oh, the hand is here, and that like, okay, there's the object, but now I need to describe the object, and then there's the puppeteer, and then there's the way they're moving, and there's all this stuff going on. But just as you're saying, that it's so important because that is exactly what's carrying, all those choices are carrying meaning. And it becomes hard to thin it down, but it's really imperative to make those descriptions and then underline how those are expressive choices.
And I feel like a lot, tell us if this was your experience as an author, but I feel like a lot of the editing process was telling our authors, no, actually you really can spend 2 pages describing this object, like really truly. Like, no, nobody's going to come and tell you don't describe the puppet, right? And it was a process of, please describe more, please tell us more, please, okay, we remember that we didn't see this. And so if you say, and then the puppet died, and then that was the end, and you okay, but how did the puppet die? What kind of puppet was? What was the lighting like at the time? Did the puppeteer withdraw? Did the puppeteer remain? And so, so that to me was actually that, and collaborating with all of these amazing folks, but that sort of permission to really own what puppets do. And to that point, I want to read you just the first 2 paragraphs of my chapter, because what this was sort of the invitation that we were then making to giving to all our authors. What I wrote is, historically, a great deal of writing about the puppet has been a kind of writing around the puppet. Writers often simply note a puppet is on stage or recount its role in the plot. We had to trim lots of plot summaries, or indicate its symbolic function without describing how large it is, how it's manipulated, what it's made of, how it moves, if its joint or chisel marks show, if it comes apart or is cut to pieces, and how it affirms or subverts audience expectations. And yet such things are the story of the puppet. That's actually probably enough. You don't need to hear more than that, but that gives you a sense of sort of what the mission of the book was.
And I want to underline that Dassia's opening, so that's so talk about structure too, that's the opening article in the series, and is packed of these very, very, I mean, its real focus is just careful looking and description of these puppets in the, thank you, remind me the collection, Alexander Exeter collection, and this description of seeing the puppets up close at the museum. So we were kind of pulling in the museum and together, and, you know, how do they look here, but how do they actually look up close? What are they actually made of? They seem to be made of something, but now when you look close, it's something else. And you take a few.
They let me touch the strings
to see how they
Isn't
move
that
and what
amazing?
sounds
So I
they
could
make.
hear it, and then you could hear like the little bits of this metal, these metal diamonds. You could hear them sort of clanking together.
And Dassia does just a beautiful job of giving you a kind of example of how carefully you can look.
Beautiful. I wonder if you want to say a little bit about the sections into which the book is divided, how you made those choices, or how you came up with that scheme a little bit. I just want to say again, because Alyssa's not here, so I just read just before we get to that. Alyssa just by email writes, warm regards from across the Atlantic. Thank you, Min, for organizing this celebration. Though I can't be there in person, I'm grateful for the chance to join the spirit. John has been a guiding light through my puppetry journey from early days in New York at spaghetti dinners and Great Small Works events to the breadth of his writings that have deeply shaped my thinking and our book. This joy and insight John brings to the puppetry community and scholarship are truly boundless. I look forward to what comes next and wish everyone a wonderful celebration. So that's from Alyssa, who I guess, I'm not sure to what extent you separated the sections as editors, but I from what I read, Alyssa was responsible for the third section on perception.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm going to
I'm
say that
sure-
we did
I'm sure you
separate them.
worked on everything.
On the other hand, we decided very early on that having things to read and go home and do more homework was going to make us never finish this book.
Right.
And so what we decided to do was actually do everything together. We would meet online. She's in the UK, Lisa's in the UK, and Dacia's in Chicago. I'm in New York. We find times to meet, and then we'd actually sit and together say, okay, now we're going to read so-and-so submission, and we'd read together and be commenting together. And it was very informative for me to see the kinds of comments that Dassia and Lisa are putting down, and to learn how they're reading in the same way that, you know, I'm reading material together. So I think that's the first thing that it was. And then we could also see, you know, how we, you know, if something needed to move into another section, or like how the book was shaping up together, because we were this process of making a communal kind of, no, we're not imposing vocabulary, but a sort of a communal idea of what the book is meant to do as we went through everything together.
Yeah, and so what you were saying earlier about it being curated, you know, it's different from the other edited volumes that I've worked on, in the sense that those were more topic based, or they were sort of what people were already doing, and then let's juxtapose those pieces against each other so that people, you know, it generates new insights. But here we were really trying to shape the direction as well. And I think by the end, we kept a Google Doc with all the feedback we gave to authors. We had 76 pages, single spaced, of feedback to authors over the multiple iterations that
Apologies to authors. Apologies.
A
lot of stuff.
And then all of the comments in the Google Docs, because we were reading them simultaneously with our cameras off on Zoom, like the whole thing was done collaboratively. So you know, there were all of these puppet meaning editor, because we were all puppet meaning editor, and so sometimes the feedback would conflict, and the authors would be like, "What do you want me to do here?"
And I don't know about the other people, but I'd be like, this It's like Dassia. This sounds like Claudia.
So writers didn't know who they were.
Not always.
Every now and then there was somebody might log in under
Yeah.
their name, but mostly no.
Yeah.
Towards the end, we took, when we had to sort of more divide up like the final stages of like, just let you focus on that one, you focus on that one,
But in terms of your question about the
Mhm.
sections and the organization of the book, what we tried to do, and I'll scroll through the slides from my section while we're talking about it. The idea with materials was to make sure that we're thinking about how a puppet is designed, how it moves, what materials it's crafted up with, what the relationship is between the puppeteer and the materials. The lovely image here from Laura Purcell Gates's chapter where she talks about this student having discovered this vine and then watching the vine lose its sap gradually and become stiffer and older, and how the performer responded to that materiality. Thinking about the qualities of paper, thinking about the way in which the puppets in Silencio Blanco's performance are manipulated, Felice's own chapter, and then Kathy Foley, thinking about how the woodenness of puppets in some Asian traditions has directly influenced the woodenness of dance, live actor dance traditions. And so how thinking about material has all of these interesting repercussions.
Maybe I just add Daniel Ortiz's chapter on Silencio Blanco really talks about paper and waste and materials that are considered of no value
And recycling
refuse
and reuse.
which becomes a metaphor for the people he's talking about. Yeah, that's great. It's great.
And so the second section is on practice. Sometimes it was a little bit difficult to figure out where to, make differentiations, but this was really more about how puppets are put into performance, or the residue of performance sometimes, but thinking about them in action. So we had this, the earlier one here, looking at the potato people, these characters that are used in so many different ways in bread and puppet theater. And so really thinking about their uses and what those meanings are when they're brought out on stage in different contexts, and the flatness of them and the experience of people moving them and how they're being told to move them or asked to move them by Sussman in these performances. Kathy Shaw, who in this looks at this idea of the archive, the archive versus the performance, then looking at a puppet as being an archive of performance and all of the aspects of it that bring the performance to life. So even though it's looking at material, it's about the way performance is captured in the puppets that are left over from performance. This is my article on lost in object translation. So if we're reading materiality on stage, and that's where the meaning is, what happens, what doesn't, styles of movement and kinds of objects are also culturally embedded. And can there be a loss in translation? So it's sort of, if a more experience of with Japanese puppets, but like looking at things and not, having a certain experience of them, but then also trying to figure out what all this stuff means. And some of these are traditions that have, or go back 800 years, and the people who perform it don't know anymore why they're doing things. Heather Denyer's looking at puppets that are being used by LGBTQ plus in LGBTQ plus contexts, and how the materiality and the choice of puppets is supporting those communities in different examples. This is, Mayumi Ilari's analysis of a show that uses both human actors and puppets in very specific moments. And I think she gives us really an example of so if you're doing an analysis, how do you read the puppets in an analysis of performance? Oh, and this Larry Switsky's Puppetry and Techno Culture really makes the argument that puppets, are speaking in a different way. So it seemed like relevant to what we just heard from Colette. They're speaking in a different way than other kinds of technology. And he gives some of these interesting examples, including this last one from an opera that uses a robot, but this robot is, again, it's the performance of the people around it that give it a kind of pathos.
Mhm. And then we'll talk about we'll just quickly go through the chapters for the last section
Yeah, great.
for Elisa. So Elisa has been doing a lot of work, looking at the intersection between puppetry and cognitive science, as has Pia Banshoff and Ana Diaz Barriga. And so that was sort of the initial impulse, is sort of how do people cognitively make sense of puppetry? But then that also expanded into, well, like, how do you think of the thinking puppet and the thinking hand and the relationship between the head and the hand and the puppeteer? So we have a piece on Handspring for that. And also, the perception of life. So very quickly, those authors are Don Brands, who looks at the table, and this sort of self-aware puppet who emphasizes its own puppetness. We have Ana Diaz Barriga, who has forever dispelled the notion that people actually forget the puppeteer, because what she did is she used gaze tracking, cognitive science methods to show that people are constantly looking back and forth between the puppet and puppeteer whenever they feel like there's meaning to be gained from that relationship. And they may forget that they're looking at the puppeteer because they may think that it doesn't have meaning in that moment, but they are actually still looking. And then we have this wonderful piece by Pia Banshoff where she looks at the uncanny and she looks at cognitive science and helps us understand how the brain works. Kate Brem, who's going to be directing here very shortly, looks at abstract puppetry and breaks down how you can be very intentional about how meaning is crafted. And then Emma Minkley at the end talking about Handspring and the way that touch and the relationship between the hand and the brain and the puppet are all meaning-making systems.
Wonderful. Thanks for the visual overview. That's great. We're down to our last 8 minutes and we haven't had too much time for audience questions. So are there any questions from you all or the Zoom, our Zoom colleagues who would be great if you made yourself known? What's the best way for someone on Zoom to ask a question? Would you pick one and read if there is one, but anyone in the room as well? Oh, yes. Yay.
Yeah, I am curious how you see the field as having changed from even the idea of making this book to the publication of this book. And I mean the field of like puppet scholarship.
Well, I love the comment in the last session that there is now enough puppetry scholarship, rigorous, excellent puppetry scholarship for there to be qualifying exams and comprehensive exams for PhD students. I love that. And I also love the comment that maybe we're at a point where we don't have to justify and apologize, we just do.
I'm going to agree, and I'm going to also add that now there's, I think when we did the Green Book, I'm going to call it now the Green Book. I like that.
We had never heard that before.
When we did the Green Book, there was a sense that there's all this people in different areas talking about things that are related to puppetry, but they're not all in the same conversation. And there's no there. Like, let's make it a there. And I also want to say that I feel very strongly that it's not just that it's a there for puppetry, but that world of puppetry, people in theater should should know about it. And I think now that, all of those things that are in the Routledge Companion are now all launching into they're each a book, that somebody has written in some area. Like they help to sort of map a field and I think all of the books I know I've worked on with co-editors have been invitations. Like we're seeing things. We're not telling you everything that's here. We're just saying, if you're interested in this, here's a model of what's interesting to write about and to talk about. Go and expand. There's more to say. We're just offering.
And this book is the same. This is not sort of the definitive, here's all the words everybody is supposed to use forever. This is we sort of tried out this new way of doing things. We probably could push it further. Go for it. Right. But Felice, I'm also interested in what you have to say about this from an author's point of view.
About how
About the, like how you feel like the field has changed maybe over the course of working on this book, or changed in your time as a scholar.
I mean, I think it's just been kind of an explosion of interest and community, and, just, I was reminded that when I first got to BU, which was not that long ago, because I'm kind of in a second career here in my life, but there's somebody in the dean's office said she can never get promoted on puppetry. And so I'm still kind of haunted by this, because there's still people who heard this powerful person in the dean's office say that. And so even when I was going through some conversations recently, someone pointed out that maybe I could make the argument that puppetry is valuable this way or that way. And I just thought, I mean, we still probably have to catch up in terms of getting our work out into the general public. But at the same time, like, we have a community. There's a rich group of people that are listening to each other, reading each other, talking to each other. So and it will ripple out.
And I want to add one more thing, which is the mentorship in the community. So I think, with this book and other books too, there's a recognition that, okay, maybe there's some people who have some really great ideas about puppetry, and they're not coming from a scholarly background, or they're not used to writing. And part of our job in making this field has been to help them articulate things, help shape things, help people move to that next step, that we're publishing all these great ideas because people have them and they want to know how to speak better. So if you're writing about puppetry, there is mentorship in the field for this.
Is there one from Zoom? We can-
Our
Oh.
next steps to take this emergent discourse onto a new plane.
Who's working on a
We
PhD?
would love to know what Frank thinks of the book, and then what Frank proposes to do next.
Well, we will ask Will. Will is the person to ask.
Read the book, learned a lot, great job, thanks to you all. I would probably flunk an exam though.
I mean, I just getting back to like your prompt, I mean, I think that invitation to write differently, because I think those of us who have been drawn to puppetry, there's something in us that responds differently to things that makes us kind of fall in love with this particular field. And so I think that permission to think that there's a space for maybe more poetic writing, maybe more writing that is
With kind of-
expression
yeah.
in and of itself, that may also help to draw people in who maybe sometimes read a lot of things that start with, kind of like from a theoretical standpoint, that they don't feel as accessible, or they don't feel that they can manage it. But I think to be able to start from the poetic things that move us and try to write poetically about what poetically moves us is a beautiful invitation.
And Kenneth Gross is such a great example of that. I love his book as well. But yeah, I guess that's the answer. I'm going to steal your answer for Frank, which is that, take hold of the invitation to think differently and therefore write differently.
Yeah. And I think you have Emma Minkley up here, but I think she does a very good example of talking very poetically. And throughout the book, there are, I mean, we talk about like creating a vocabulary, but we didn't really like say, here's a vocabulary. I mean, people really have their own forms of expression, and there's a lot of variety. So there's a lot of, so I think the book is also saying there's a lot of ways to talk about it, but don't ignore the material, don't ignore the practice, and don't ignore perception.
One thing I think I feel compelled to add to the conversation as we wrap up in a minute. My background is in the field of performance studies. I didn't come from theater history. And I think it's worth remembering that many of these topics were appearing in that field's journal in TDR. The Puppets, Masks, and Performing Objects book started as a special issue of TDR. So that was a very welcome place for this work. John, your work appeared, I'm quite sure, in TDR quite a bit. And you could do a comp exam in a material performance topic. Back when I was a grad student, it wasn't left out of the room. In fact, the interdisciplinarity of puppetry was sort of very much in keeping with the interdisciplinary nature of performance studies, which was seen as a field of inclusions and not exclusions. So my performance studies anxieties come to the fore a little bit when hearing about discipline formation, because we in the old days of the field, which is different now, there was a lot of suspicion about disciplinary formation. And of course, performance studies went on to establish itself as a solid discipline, despite the reservations of many who preferred to keep it a little below the radar, interstitial, subversive, etc. And I think this volume keeps the spirit of both. It doesn't sacrifice anything for its the sort of establishment of a disciplinary language, but it keeps a really heterogeneous group of articles between its covers. So thank everybody.
you.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's swag up here if you want.
And magnets. Are there
If you
still
want a
magnets?
magnet, yeah, there's magnets and flyers, and the magnet on the back has a discount code.
Ooh, didn't know that. Didn't
Yeah.
know that. Great. Thanks.
She's the mastermind behind this, I'm just saying.
Are we on a 15-minute break now? Okay. 3:45. Thanks.